Welcome to a special episode of the Positive Gene Podcast. I hadn't planned a new episode so soon, and you may notice I am not using my usual intro today because, well, this is too important. With the upcoming election, I feel an urgency to speak from the heart about what's at stake, not just for women's health, but also for those facing hereditary cancer risks and the unique challenges that come with them. And this is not just about politics. This is actually very deeply personal. In fact, this episode isn't about endorsing anyone, but rather understanding what these policies mean for women, families, and our healthcare system as a whole. My story is just one example of why these issues matter so much and why they could impact our lives in ways we simply cannot ignore. So first, for some personal context, I had 2 miscarriages in my life, and both experiences were profoundly different. My first miscarriage in 2011 was around 10 weeks, and it happened on Christmas Eve with my extended family, a time that's supposed to be, filled with joy. Instead, I was wrecked with physical pain and emotional turmoil, just knowing that I was losing my first pregnancy. I was told to let the pregnancy pass naturally, but no one prepared me for what that meant. The blood, the isolation, the fear, and the thought that I might need to go to a hospital on Christmas Eve in very rural northern Michigan. And it was one of the darkest and most painful experiences of my life. And while I am so thankful for my supportive family that day, I felt emotionally broken and physically drained. It was a Christmas I will never forget, but for all the wrong reasons. In 2016, when I found out I was going through another miscarriage, I knew I could not endure that trauma again. I made the decision to have a D&C. Thankfully, I had that option. As a Christian, my faith guides my values, including compassion and caring for others. And I believe that every woman deserves access to safe and compassionate medical support in moments like these. That D&C procedure spared me the physical and emotional suffering I experienced during my first miscarriage. And I have felt grateful to have the medical support to make the right choice for me. But I do worry about the women in the future who might not have that option. Now, it's a lot, that's heavy, but I share all of that to emphasize what's potentially at stake in this election. You may have heard of Project 2025, and in the context of this episode, it proposes a range of changes that could seriously impact healthcare for women, families, vulnerable communities. So knowing how essential timely and compassionate care was during my miscarriages, I feel compelled to address the very real risks that these policies could create. I have 3 items I want to talk about today. I know there are several others that I may be able to address, but for purposes of keeping this episode brief, I'm just going to focus on 3. Emergency reproductive health care, Medicaid and Medicare coverage, and environmental health protections are the 3 we'll talk about today. So the first is emergency reproductive health care. So this is where my story connects directly to the larger issue. Project 2025 includes provisions that could restrict access to critical reproductive care, including procedures like D&Cs for non-viable pregnancies, as was my case. So imagine being in a situation where a medical emergency requires intervention, but doctors hesitate to act out of fear of legal repercussions. Now, ProPublica has highlighted this chilling effect that leaves healthcare providers uncertain if they can offer needed care, even when waiting could mean severe complications. I worry about the women who may not receive the compassionate, timely care I was so fortunate to have received those years ago. The second point is Medicaid and Medicare coverage. So this point hits close to home for the hereditary cancer community because it's linked to screening and managing chronic conditions. Project 2025's proposed shift to state-controlled Medicaid block grants could allow states to impose stricter eligibility requirements like work mandates and lifetime caps on benefits that could leave millions without necessary coverage. Again, for those managing hereditary cancer risks or chronic conditions, stable and affordable access to healthcare is essential for screenings, prevention, and consistent care. In addition, the plan's repeal of the Inflation Reduction Act, or IRA, would also mean higher costs for Medicare enrollees, who have benefited from provisions that reduce out-of-pocket expenses for prescriptions and vaccines. The IRA currently provides over 52 million Medicare beneficiaries with free vaccines, saving patients more than $400 million in out-of-pocket costs. Repealing the IRA would mean these protections and these savings disappear, making critical healthcare access even more challenging. And the third element I want to talk about today is environmental health protections. Now, for anyone living in the hereditary cancer community, environmental health is also a major concern. When you're living with hereditary cancer risk, you will do anything to protect your genetic health and avoid exposure to additional elements that might increase your risk. Project 2025 proposes weakening the Environmental Protection Agency's role, which plays a vital part in maintaining clean air and water standards. Now, I've experienced this firsthand, how critical this is. Back when I lived in Rockford, Michigan, my family and I unknowingly lived with a PFAS contamination, PFAS-tainted sludge that was dumped for years in the 1960s. We lived in this community for 5 years before it was fully discovered and addressed. So PFAS, which are often called forever chemicals, are linked to serious health risks, including certain cancers, and they can linger in the environment in our bodies for decades. Sadly, my story and the story of the communities in Rockford, Michigan are not unique. Millions of American families have experienced harm from environmental toxins in the water they drink and the air we breathe. Agencies like the EPA are essential for regulating these pollutants and holding companies accountable, helping to prevent the long-term health impacts of environmental toxins. Rolling back the EPA protections could allow more forever chemicals like PFAS to enter our communities unchecked, putting everyone's health at risk. These changes aren't just policy shifts, they are real, tangible threats to healthcare access and public health protections. They limit opportunities for things that are so important to us in the hereditary cancer community, like preventative care, cancer risk management, and essential screenings. Now, friends, what I want to remind you is that we have the power to influence the future of our healthcare. This election is more than just politics, and I keep saying this, but it's about protecting ourselves, our family, and the future of women's health. It's not about endorsing one candidate or another on this podcast, but I hope you'll reflect on the kind of future you want for your health and the health of those you love. As we move forward, let's stay informed, let's use our voices, and let's make sure our health and our worth are respected. Thank you for listening, and always stay empowered on your journey. Thank you for spending time with me on the Positive Gene podcast. Your support means everything. If you found value in today's episode, I would be so grateful if you could take a moment to rate and review the podcast. It truly makes a difference. For an in-depth look and links to resources discussed today, check out the accompanying blog on my website at saracavanaugh.com.